Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar Orti, and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to episode 320 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. This is a What's Going On episode, and here with me as always for these episodes is co-host Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar, and everybody. Can we say Happy New Year if it's the first recording? It's 320 and 23 and all those.
We can say what we want because it's our show.
Oh, yeah.
This will probably come out, I think it's the 1st or 2nd of February. So, but you know, it's never too late.
I'm still writing 22 on things by mistake, so I'm sure everybody else is.
Well, welcome in any case, and happy whatever time of the year you're in. Happy month. And today's episode, well, it's a little bit different. I feel, when we were preparing it, I was thinking it felt a bit like the last episode, which was the wrapping up of 2022, because this episode we're going to look at what we think is going to happen in 2023. And we're going to do this, as always, using stuff that other people are putting out there, articles and reports that people are putting out there. And of course, I couldn't help but jumping on the GPT-3, the ChatGPT bandwagon, and we asked it what it thought that the main problems that people would face when working from home in 2023 would be. So we've got that to look forward to. But of course, we also have a report from Gartner, hopefully written by humans, some stuff about going back to the office or changing legislation. We've got loads of stuff that also hasn't been generated by ChatGPT. And one thing that I noticed when I went onto the chatbot yesterday, well, one, it said that it was at capacity right now. And it was 5 minutes ago as well. And the other thing is that somewhere I saw that it was saying that it was taking the information and the text to generate its answer mainly from mid-2021. So
Yes, I think it's quite on facts. It's often very out of date and can produce some quite anomalous stuff. I've certainly come across that before. I think it's because the data sets they're training it on are mainly historical, and it means that it knows about COVID, but it doesn't know anything about the war in Ukraine, for example.
Right.
I've seen things that I know are generated by OpenAI that talk about Britain being in the EU and things like that. And it just hasn't got a clue what's real and what isn't anymore. It just knows what it's consumed from the internet of the past. It's got no filter on truth and reality.
Yeah. So when we ask it for predicting 2023, well, again, we take it all. We thought it'd be interesting to just put it out there, and then we'll riff on it and see how exact we think it is. But another thing is, for the last newsletter for December 2022, I don't know if did I introduce myself, Maya? My name is Pilar Orti. I don't know.
Who are you anyway?
If we haven't met before, my name is Pilar. I know I introduced Maya. So in the last newsletter of 2022, I introduced, I shared a poem that ChatGPT produced on asynchronous communication. And I have to say, it's the time I've had most replies from the readers. So I thought there's definitely something in the air, including Penny Pullen said, well, it's got a better grasp than a lot of people out there about what it is. And then the guys from Learning Stone also pointed me towards their page that they had where they'd got the ChatGPT to write about blended learning, which is what they do. And also they'd also generated lots of images. So yes, lots of people playing with it. Oh, and Bastian Siepman, who was our guest talking about Asana on in episode 310, he also said that they're bringing ChatGPT into Asana. So lots of people playing around, and we'll see where collaboration explodes, really.
Yeah, I'm also on the wait list for Notion's AI, which is going to fill my Notion database up with randomly AI-generated stuff, I guess. Can't wait. It's going to be an interesting year.
Wow. Okay. So I'm sure we'll be talking more about it. And of course, something that I didn't put in the notes, but I heard a couple said yesterday, Microsoft is investing heavily in it, isn't it?
And that would be really interesting to see what that investment looks like, especially when they hook it up to an up-to-date version of Bing instead of just these ancient data sets it's been trained on. So yeah, prepare for interesting times.
Okay, well let's get going then with our first point of conversation. So I asked GPT-3 about the main problems that people might face with working from home in 2023. And it said, it's difficult for me to accurately predict the main problems that people will face with working from home in 2023, as a lot can change in a short period of time. But here are some potential problems. Loneliness and isolation. Working from home can be isolating. Difficulty disconnecting. When your home is also your workplace, it can be hard to separate work from leisure and switch off after a long day. Limited social interaction. Working from home can limit opportunities for social interaction and in-person collaboration with colleagues. Technology issues. Technical difficulties and problems with video conferencing or other remote collaboration tools can be a source of frustration when working from home. Distractions at home. It can be hard to focus on work when you're in a familiar home environment with a variety of distractions. Limited resources. Some people might find it challenging to work effectively from home if they don't have access to the resources and equipment they need. And overwork. It can be easy to feel like you're always on when you're working from home, which can lead to feelings of burnout and overwork. Overall, it's important to find ways to stay connected and engaged while working from home and to make sure that you have the resources and support you need to be productive and successful. What do you think of the list, Maya?
Well, I think this is exactly what I would have expected if I'd commissioned a listicle of issues with working from home based on 2020 or 2021. But I guess that's exactly what we'd expect, given what we just said about the data set and the large learning model. You know, the way these things work is by predicting what the next thing to say is and what the most likely acceptable follow-on from whatever the prompt is. So this is exactly like you just fed all the listicles about working from home for the last 20 years into a large language learning model, and this is what you'd get.
Yeah, I have to say I did ask about working from home rather than remote work to make it more specific, but I actually think that it's spot on.
Yep. I suppose for me, it kind of highlights the problem, or maybe the blessing of this, is that it can't add anything to the debate, to what's already out there. It's basically just rechurning and rehashing. It's got, there's nothing new here for anybody who's ever read an article about working from home or done it for a few days.
Yeah. So I think that the technology issues have been underestimated in organizations. And I am finding it really difficult to advocate for online collaboration, like the way that we've been seeing it, and definitely as I've been imagining it, and especially when we talk of visible teamwork, because the technology issues, I think, obviously not because people are at home, because they can also be in the office and they'll have the same tech issues. But I think there's a underestimation of how important it is that things work properly and seamlessly, and that technology can be used to its full potential. Like, I just very recently came across an organization where they were having problems with the whiteboards, for example. They can't use whiteboards because sometimes they crash, sometimes they don't. When they have workshops, if they have breakout rooms, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And on the one hand, I think, well, let's know that this is going to happen. Let's accept that this is happening and plan accordingly. And on the other hand, I'm like, no, why have we got so much potential to make this work properly and it's not working?
And there's probably 100 different whiteboards that you could have now to try, and people don't know which one is going to work with the other stuff they've got. And maybe, there still aren't enough experts in collaboration software procurement. I don't know if that's part of the problem, that IT buyers used to deal specifically with unified communications or with security or with specific issues, but now we need more generalists who can make the whole lot work together for people who aren't on site. I don't know what it is, but you're absolutely right that the technology, for all its proliferation, making it all work together has not been solved. The collaboration of collaboration or something.
Yeah. And I wonder whether what will happen, or what I'm already seeing, talking about the stuff that's out there that I'm absorbing sometimes. And usually, I think that usually a lot of the articles don't go into any depth from it, but the language I'm hearing and the way that the hybrid model is being talked about still feels like the away from the office, or whether it's the home or wherever we're doing our away from base work, is work that I do individually, deep focus, and then we leave the conversations and interactions for the real time and if possible in person. And I totally get that.
Yeah, but it's a simple kind of reductive way of looking at it, isn't it? That doesn't take into account people's different styles and preferences for the environment or how they want to work with each other. And yeah, it's a shame to be so limiting, really.
Yeah, in a way, we'll go back. I mean, we'll never go back to how things were, but I think that the modes of collaboration and interaction will probably go back. I think as well, at the beginning, when a lot of people were using these kind of technologies for the first time, the novelty and the relief that there was some way to do things,
yes,
even though it wasn't perfect, was enough to get them through. And now they're expecting, as they should, for things to be more seamless.
Yeah, and I agree. In many cases, it hasn't really lived up to the expectations. I'm sure if you ask people 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, or wherever we were starting to get used to working this way, if you'd said in 2023, what's this going to look like and feel like, people would have said, well, I expect it's just going to blow our minds with how amazingly integrated and natural it all will feel. And nah, not so much in reality.
And in a way, and I'm gonna have a go at organizations leading the way. I don't work for them, and I don't do this great work that they've done, which allows us to do that. But in a way, it's like organizations are moving to the next big thing. The technology companies, like virtual reality, and how can we do these meetings which are like super immersive, this and that, or the amazing tech in the hybrid meeting rooms, and everything that's really basic.
Like to get the whiteboard working first.
Yeah. And like you say, and something that is really basic and that allows for more people to find different ways of working. So I don't know. Do you do you see any new problems apart from these? And I mean, this is a list. It's not any sort of in-depth thing that the bot generated. But do you see anything that we should add to this?
In terms of working from home,
yeah.
I think it's interesting. The one thing I hadn't predicted a couple of years ago was this. There's almost a pushback against working from home from the work from anywhere movement now, that people are sometimes being a bit almost disparaging about, what you mean you work from home? Open your eyes, because you could be a digital nomad or in a co-working, having all this stimulation that you don't want because you prefer to work from home because you're quite introverted and you need to concentrate. Or there's kind of almost, I have this website and small book series of healthy, happy homeworking, and I'm finding that I almost want to rebrand that, because homeworking and working from home is being seen as so 2020. And we've moved beyond that because we're all work from anywhere now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that in building on that is the realization that in order to comply with the law and in order to do things properly and not get into trouble, organizations can't allow people to work from anywhere. And I think that because during the pandemic, basically people weren't really worrying about that. And now organizations are starting to worry about that. I think that also builds on that the fact that, yes, in theory, you can work from anywhere, but actually you can't as an individual. So I can't work from anywhere, definitely. And sometimes it's just not possible.
Yes, and maybe it's easier for organisations just to say, well, you have to work from home because we did a health and safety inspection there once, or whatever. And, oh, what, you mean you can't go and work from a desert island?
because the tax is not, the tax person will not recognize that island. It's all that boring stuff.
Yeah, that slowly catches up with the reality. And yes, the regulation always comes along, and it's this last thing to change as well.
So I think, that's definitely happening. And, talking about humans predicting and writing articles a bit more in depth, I picked up an article from Rafa from the Future for Work Institute, which is they're a think tank and consultancy in Spain. And he had a series of predictions on the work for 2023. And this line I found horrifying, and I hadn't thought of this. And I'm going to translate on the fly. He said, the evolution towards hybrid models has taken some businesses to create smaller teams, so smaller work teams, and adding more managers to improve supervision. In the thing we were saying, okay, I agree with smaller teams. I think that's fantastic because remote work, I think, works better with smaller teams. I think lots of works better with smaller teams. But the fact that the teams are smaller so that then you can have more managers and you can have basically the headcount of one manager per smaller headcount than before because of the need of supervision. I was, oh no.
Yeah, this is quite scary, isn't it? And it's probably not limited to Spain, although I know Spain has had particular issues with adapting in some ways beyond the hierarchical models. And I don't know, maybe an excuse to have more layers and more different differentiations. And you can be the manager of these three people. That is quite a scary prediction.
Yeah. So anyway, I just told him it was a bit scary, and I'd love to see what managers think. Whether actually it's all right, you can add that if that's going to help teams feel more cohesive, or people trust their people more or less.
Yeah, it's a lack of trust, isn't it? And now I know that the Spanish word for paranoia is the same as English.
Yes. And the other thing I think you've talked a lot about building trustless systems, and we talk a lot about visible work and visible workflow. And I really think that's missing. It's the fact that it's the opposite. You should need less managers and less supervision when you move online. That's the whole point of adopting online collaboration.
Absolutely. You shouldn't be paying people to just know what other people are doing. I mean, that's incredibly wasteful and inefficient apart from anything else.
Yeah. So that's maybe, hopefully that's not something to look forward to, but we shall see. I think this could go in any way. And then Gartner has an article that was then actually it inspired another Harvard Business Review article with the 9 future of work trends for 2023. And maybe, Maya, maybe you and I can both pick one of these to say something about, but I'll just give it a quick read for listeners. 1, quiet hiring offers new ways to snag in-demand talent. 2, hybrid flexibility reaches the front lines. 3, squeezed by competing leader and employee expectations, managers need support. 4, pursuit of non-traditional candidates expands talent pipelines. 5, healing pandemic trauma opens path to sustainable performance. 6, organizations push DEI forward amid growing pushback. 7, getting personal with employee support creates new data risks. 8, algorithmic bias concerns lead to more transparency in recruiting tech. And 9, Gen Z skills gaps reveal workforce-wide erosion of social skills. I'm going to backtrack and say you can comment on as many as you want. This is more interesting than the ChatGPT.
We could do a whole podcast based on this one article because, we could do a whole conference on all of these. Although some of them do kind of make the same point. I think this idea about non-traditional hiring actually embraces a lot of different stuff here, like non-traditional candidates and things like hybrid flexibility. All comes into this idea of hopefully, unlike the Spanish commentator, a push towards reframing what it means to employ someone and get work done, and looking at that more from a kind of matching expectations and results-based idea rather than sort of owning someone's time and output in a more traditional way. So hopefully there's promise here for something better in the future.
Yeah, you can't but think that it's not just remote work, it's not just the schedule flexibility, but also the 4-day week movement. All of this stuff has to be sipping into the collective subconscious, and we're going, okay, let's reframe that, let's really look at that.
Yeah, and let's look at it from both sides, because of we've got these trends like the Great Resignation and quiet quitting on one side, and then we've got millions of tech layoffs on the other side. And out of all of that, it's like we've got to tear up the whole idea of an employment contract and start again. Well, you need some stuff done, and here are some people who can do it. What kind of deal are you going to make with each other? What do you both expect? What do you both need out of this process? And kind of reframe the whole thing to move on from this, because otherwise it just gets weird. I mean, quiet hiring, surely people it just gets too weird. I mean, quiet hiring is surely just kind of giving people what they need to do the work.
Yeah, I hope we don't have many more of these terms.
Yeah.
I am very pleased to hear that our possible trend is hybrid flexibility reaches the front lines, because this was the big problem that kept being flagged in 2022. Was it's all very well that knowledge workers have all this location flexibility. What about us?
Yes, absolutely. The people who can't afford to live in the places that the work needs to be done in certain sort of public-facing ways were being excluded from so much. So it does. That is a really good trend to see.
Yeah, I hope we see that. And please, listeners, if you are in an organization or if you hear of an organization where the whole flexible work model is actually being adapted to a whole very diverse organization, diverse in all sorts of ways, let us know. Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com, or you can use the contact form on virtualnotdistant.com. We'd love to hear from you, and let us know if we can share it with other listeners as well. I quite liked especially how they've phrased this: healing pandemic trauma opens path to sustainable performance. I mean, I'm not quite sure what they mean, but I find that the mention that basically that the trauma from the pandemic is still there. It hasn't quite, it's healing. It hasn't healed.
Yes. And newsflash, some people had other trauma as well, and other mental health needs, other emotional needs that were always part of them, the work that they did and the self that they brought to work. So yeah, if the pandemic is the gateway to talking about that and some kind of organizational or management acceptance that we need to address that and support people, then yeah, that could be one positive outcome from all of this.
Yeah. And we've said, and lots of people say, how the pandemic opened up the conversation around well-being, specifically mental health. And one thing that for me is specific to the pandemic is that because of that period and the period of lockdown, a lot of people have had a reaction to certain parts of work that was unexpected. And I'll just give the example of someone I know who just cannot go on a Zoom call.
Wow.
It's that's it. It's like, do not take me there. And it doesn't surprise me. And that kind of stuff, I think that I'm glad to see that it's being mentioned in this way, because for me, it's not just about, it's more nuanced, I think, and the effect is still there.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I was pleased to see it like that. And then, like you say, if it then opens up, and because of that, we are also opening up to healing all kinds of other problems, then yes, please.
And seeing it as an upside for the organization, when you do understand people have this baggage that they bring with them, they can't just leave it behind, whether they're working from home or coming into an office, that maybe we needed some kind of global trauma to just level the playing field a bit. So, nobody could say COVID's a sign of weakness if you happen to get ill or you happen to suffer during lockdown or you happen to lose someone you love. There's something very leveling about that it's not about being a better performer than anybody else if you somehow get lucky. And if that's shifted some perspectives or some values at an organizational level, then hopefully that is for the collective good.
I do have one concern about going forwards with all this. I don't know if I've mentioned it here, Maya, as well, and sorry if I mentioned it more than once. And it's that the whole, because of the way that the working from home was experienced during the lockdown and stuff, and basically we were just getting on with it unless you were really ill. For me, the ability to now work from home for many people is might mean that they work while they're ill. And that it becomes much more difficult to say, I've got to take the day off.
Yeah.
Actually, my husband needs to takes day off, and he said, well, I'll work from home, and then in the end it was like, no, I'm going to have to take the day off. But it becomes more difficult. Or actually, we were watching something and someone said about a broken leg. And it's okay. Before, if you broke your leg and you couldn't go into the office, that was it. You stayed home to rest because
your bones for months, probably.
And your bones needed to heal, so you needed to sleep more. There's all that stuff.
Yes.
But now, so I'm worried about that.
Yes, if it's just your leg, then what's the problem? You can have a laptop, and yes, people wouldn't be given that time, or they wouldn't expect it in the same way. And I think you're absolutely right. Last year, I went through a number of really personally difficult events personally. And somebody said to me over Christmas, oh, did you take the time, to how did you rest following that loss? And I thought, oh, hang on a minute, I didn't at all. At no point did I say to myself, I need to take a complete detachment from this. And I can't use work as a barrier to thinking about things and healing emotionally any more than you can to heal physically from something like a broken leg or a cold that just won't go, or post-COVID syndrome, or whatever else people are dealing with. I think there is a definite risk that we carry on just pushing through it now in a way we never would have been expected to before.
So something to put out there for both people in leadership positions, but for everyone actually, because I don't think that anyone will do this and ask for this deliberately. But it's another of these things that, just inertia might lead us all to not rest when we need to.
Yes, and I think this whole idea that Gartner are calling out this as a trend, that there's a risk of this emotional support and burnout prevention and all of that becoming a bit performative and formulaic as well. So let's see managers really walking the talk on this one, rather than, it could be a bit like workplace harassment was 20 years ago. Well, no, we don't have harassment. We have a policy. We have a document, we have a committee or whatever. I mean, it's like, but this is still going on. It's like schools that don't have any bullying. This stuff has to go really deep to make a difference, and it has to be beyond just writing articles about it or having decisions about it. It has to really infuse through the whole organization and every team.
And I think that for this, remote work can be more difficult because we are away from each other. So I think that also we need to take individual responsibility and also just bring this up.
Yes, definitely.
Because it's always the individual that says, no, don't worry, I'll continue working. And sometimes it's because they're bored as well, because going to sleep sometimes in the middle of the day feels really weird. So I think, something to
and the managers need support with this too. I mean, quite apart from every other aspect of managing remote teams that they may not have had the training on, that they suddenly got bumped into doing. It's much harder to see that somebody is stressed or burned out or just physically ill when they're not in front of you looking like death warmed up and you could say, okay, go home. It's much harder to pick that up when somebody's just dealing with you online, and maybe you're not, your organization is so progressive, it's moved to more asynchronous communication instead of the endless Zoom calls. And really, it'd be quite easy for a manager who's not very alert and very aware and ready to have difficult conversations sometimes about how somebody is, not about their performance, but about how they are, to really pick this up and be able to provide the support that's needed. None of this is easy. And to make it work is going to require quite a lot of deliberate effort.
So surely the answer is to everyone go back to the office.
No. That's going to make everybody a lot more ill and stressed.
So we have a couple of articles that are connected to office space. But before that, I would like to liven up the episode with a poem by GPT-3. So I asked the machine to write a sonnet about why managers might insist that people go back to the office. And this is what it said. Why must we leave the comfort of our homes, a place of peace and quiet, calm and ease? Is it the leer of office politics or fear of change that drives our bosses' pleas? Perhaps they miss the bustle of the day, the chatter and the laughter, coffee cups, the sense of teamwork and camaraderie that office life so often seems to bring up. Or maybe they just crave a sense of norm, a world that's safe and stable, known and clear. A place where all the pieces seem to fit and all the rules are strict and free from fear. But let us not forget the joys of home, the freedom and the flexibility it brings. Perhaps it's time to embrace the unknown and give remote work a chance to spread its wings. So, if you enjoyed that, you will be pleased to know that I spent like 1 hour yesterday feeding the bot.
Were you bored or something?
No, I'm going to put a book together. Chad, can you write a poem about traveling the world in the style of Lorca? And it spit it out. And wonderful. So anyway, I thought that was...
no wonder it's overloaded, Pilar. It's all you, isn't it?
Sorry, listeners, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I thought it was, I loved it. I think it's really interesting, and there was an article that I think it came out. I think I saw it during the Christmas break, and I thought, wow, oh yeah, I did because I remember walking in where we go in at Christmas with my husband and telling him about it. It is the mayor of D.C., of Washington, D.C., who urges Biden to end the telework policies for federal workers. And I thought this was so interesting that someone was voicing what I think has been quite obvious. And it's that, look, we either use our offices or let's get rid of them and make something else with them. Well, but let's use the space, use it differently.
And the headline only focuses on one of those options.
The headline does. That's really interesting. The headline does, but the article, luckily, it says a little bit more.
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. Because sorry, Maya. So for listeners, this is published on the 3rd of January 2023 on thehill.com. DC Mayor urges Biden to end telework policies for federal workers. You're right. They just mentioned that in the headline.
But it's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's feeding that agenda of everybody thinks everybody has to go back to the office. But that's not really what the mayor said at all. It was just like, well, hey, we've got all these buildings that we should do something with. And she mentions we could realign their vast property holdings for use by local government, by non-profits, by businesses, and by any user willing to revitalize it.
Yeah.
She's really just making the point that they're managing this big empty space, and it's not really about where those federal workers work at all. It's about the resource that's sitting empty, which is the mayor's business, rather than what federal employees are doing. I thought so. Yeah, just a kind of a very angled headline.
Yeah, but I love that, highlighting office buildings left empty by the remote work policies as opportunities for affordable housing.
Yes.
And I wonder, talking of what 2023 might bring, and you were talking about legislation, and I wonder whether at some levels, the change makers at government level or maybe in NGOs, whatever, will start to say, look, this is not about whether people can work from home or not, and whether we're hybrid and whether we have to come into the office. This is the fact that this kind of world is not what it was.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of changes happening, and how we're going to make the most and the best out of it.
Yes, and those buildings are part of the problem, but they can also be part of the solution in the same way that lots of industrial buildings are now used for people to live in, or they're smaller. Some of them became office units, and then maybe in time they will have a third use as work from home spaces that are well adapted for people to actually live in as well. And I think there could be lots of very positive outcomes from this, including city centres having people actually afford to live in them again.
That would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Washington, maybe even London could have people, actual communities of people who live there, and kind of maybe people don't want to live in post-war office blocks. I don't know. There'd have to be some changes, but maybe if 50 years ago you'd said, well, people want to live in old industrial mills and things like that, but then they got converted into amazing luxury of very high-end housing often. So that a bit of imagination and good architecture, who knows what could be possible.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to more of these kind of stories, and also at some point having to make a bold decision. I think as well what was been happening with the hybrid setup is that it's become a bit difficult to say, no, our organization is office based and office first. So you've got to live with that, or no, our organization is remote first. And I hope that organizations start to become bolder about what they want to be, whatever that is for me.
Yeah. And I suppose these are quite long-term decisions, because those commercial leases are probably 10 years, or maybe with a break clause at 5, which means people didn't have to decide at the end of 2020, what are we doing? Often they're stuck with that building regardless. So let's go hybrid for a bit. Let's see what people want. Let's see how the world works. But those leases are going to start to expire on a rolling basis, and people are going to have to make really big decisions financially for organizations. And what do we do with these 3 blocks, or these thousands of square meters? Yeah. And it'd be interesting to see which way they jump.
So talking of office spaces, I think also the trend of cutting office space, I came across an article that Salesforce is going to cut off some office space to save some costs. And of course, Salesforce owns Slack now as well. And I found that really interesting that it was only in episode 294, so not too long ago. It's measuring live time in episode length, in episode number. And they had been building some new premises for their employees and stuff. And it's not that they're going to cut that specific office space, but I found it, again, another article about companies having to cut costs and office and people, of course.
Yes, and this is all part of the big bloodbath in tech at the moment, where, I mean, in this article that you shared from CoStar sums it up perfectly in the final paragraph. They hired too many people because they had a flood of revenue during the pandemic. And we're seeing this awful phrase, overhiring, where they kind of invested that surplus revenue into offering people jobs that they hadn't really got, or that, maybe they just kind of padded a little bit, and now those people are getting cut back by equal percentages, except that they're not some kind of surplus resource in a warehouse, but they're actual people with expectations and careers and families and visas. And it's really horrible what's happening in lots of cases. So, yeah, I hate that phrase, overhiring. We hired too many people. Let's just hope there's some long-term lessons from this.
Yeah, well, it happens though. That's where bubbles happen. I mean, it's not the first time this happens as well. It's been so, because they look like the big winners as well during the pandemic. So I think it's just a little bit of everything crashing and yeah. So Jen Riggins had a great article in the News Stack of how will working in tech change in 2023, and she looks at all of this as happening, but also attitudes and the ways in which how people working in tech, the different options, how they might change, how they look for work exactly. And you also have a piece in the eresident.gov.ee mainly on the knowledge economy and how that might look like in 2023.
Yes. I mean, a lot of that obviously involves people either working in tech or working for tech companies. And I tried to look at some of the more optimistic ideas about these people. Yes, there are proving to be a lot of layoffs, but for a start, a lot of these people are being laid off with quite decent packages. Not in every case, but a lot of them have got enough time to think about what they want to do first before, and maybe they're sort of once bitten anyway and don't want to jump into the next full-time employment gig straight away. And that hopefully we'll see more flexibility and more blended teams going forward. That's certainly something that there's research evidence to back up, that people are hiring freelancers now to work alongside full-time staff and founders in more project-driven, almost gigified ways, but at different levels, hiring on people as consultants. And maybe if you've just been made redundant from a big tech enterprise that's made the headlines, then you can afford to just look around and do some short-term stuff and decide what you want. And then maybe you can found your own startup in a year's time once you've figured out who you want to work with or what problems you want to solve. So, but it's going to be a tough year, I think, for a lot of people in tech. Rowena Hennigan, who's also been on previous shows, has some good resources on LinkedIn that she's been collating for helping people who've been the victim of tech layoffs, and just sort of pulling together different places you can look for advice and options, particularly around the remote and flexible possibilities that people might not always have considered if they've tended to be the sort of full-time employees. And I think it's probably also worth remembering as well that this is just tech. You know, it's part of the economy, but an awful lot of other sectors of the economy are still struggling to hire the right people and to find enough people. And it makes headlines when somewhere like Meta suddenly lays off thousands of people, but it makes fewer headlines that places in other industries can't find the people with the skills they want. And all of this is good for the remote movement, that hirers and employees or contractors or freelancers or whoever they turn out to be are going to have to look at things more flexibly.
And I was listening to an episode of After Hours. I think it was in November 2022. I love this podcast. If listeners are interested, it's two and sometimes three Harvard professors looking at the news. And one of the points they made is we don't just need tech people in tech companies. Everyone needs really good tech people. And actually, this is an opportunity, like as you say, to find some people who are top of their game, who know, who have great performance and stuff, and we can spread them a little bit more so that actually every organization can have better tech, which we need.
Yes, cheering loudly. And no organization can say, "Oh, we're not a tech company," because I'm struggling to think of any business use case where you could say we don't use technology. And if you're an automation specialist, you could go and work in, I don't know, supply chain or agriculture or there's so many places that could use better automation and so on, with whether it's data security or developing niche apps or whatever. There are just so many places you could go and take those skills. We'd be very grateful for them, I expect.
Yeah. So that's again, we'll see how all of that pans out. It'll be interesting to see at the end of the year what's happened with those kind of employees. And of course, we have got there's one last bit, one last piece of news. And I think I was on holiday when this came out, so I didn't participate in the whole conversation around it. But listener Hugh sent it to me and said, "Did you see this?" And it was, of course, the headlines that Shopify tells employees to just say no to meetings. And what I found really interesting, and going back to your comment about the Washington, D.C. headline, is that this headline also, it's the headline that it's a nice clickbait headline. I think the reality is a bit more nuanced than just say no to meetings.
Yeah, let's hope so, because meetings have got such a bad rap thanks to the way things like Zoom were used during the pandemic. And, meetings can be quite useful, and I'm sure people will go on having them even at Shopify.
And it's not just online meetings that have a bad name. All meetings have always had in the past years a bad name. So I think it's a hangover as well from old ways of collaborating, not always, but traditional ways of collaborating.
Yes, and anything that makes you re-examine things that you've taken for granted as practices for a long time is probably a good thing. This comment that you shared the link to in a chat, it said things like big meetings of more than 50 people will get shoehorned into a 6-hour window on Thursdays. And my first thought was, hang on, 50 people in a meeting? What the
Yeah.
hell is that? That's a conference, or
Well,
that's a webinar, or that's, that has to be a sort of one-to-many form of communication. There can't be 50 people having a meaningful conversation with each other, surely.
and a little segue before I go back to the article. So what do they mean by just say no to meetings? Because as you say, it's more nuanced than that. There is an issue, and I hope we solve this one, where there's an issue with language. As in, there's an issue with what we call what. So like you say, a meeting of 50 people. If you call a meeting with 50 people by the same name as a meeting with 5 people, how do you expect people to know what they're expected to do at that meeting?
And what am I supposed to cancel now?
Yeah, or what am I supposed to prepare or not? And I'm sure
Yes.
that it's not just we have a meeting, and there will be more information about that. But especially when we talk about online, it's even more important to define, what do we mean by a webinar? What do we mean by a workshop? What is an all hands? What is an ask me anything? What is I don't know, something else? And even if it's the definition within the organization, because the expectations of turning up how I'm supposed to be turning up to a meeting with 50 people is not like if I just turn up to my team meeting. So
yes. And it's good to just review it and have those conversations internally. It feels a bit sort of new year, new startish.
yes.
This sense that, I'm going to throw everything out of the fridge, or I delete all my apps and only add back the ones that I use, or turn everything around in your closet so you can see what clothes you actually wear by pulling them out, and you turn the hanger around, or all these kind of life hacky things. And maybe we need that at the level of, if anywhere's got in the habit of having meetings every day and meetings of 6 hours or 50 people or something, maybe you do need to go a bit cold turkey and just say, right, get rid of the lot, and then bring them back one by one as we discuss the need case and justify it. And say, okay, we do need to have that conversation with that group of people at this time, and just examine it if you haven't examined it in a while.
And then people will be so glad to have them.
Yes.
So what they're saying that they're doing here at Shopify, sorry, I keep doing that. They're removing all recurring meetings with more than 2 people. So it's that recurring, it's that thing that it's just there regardless, while re-upping a rule that no meeting at all can be held on Wednesdays. So they already had, to be honest, it's not that this has come out of nowhere. They already had a culture of looking at this. So, but the other thing is that this is not just about meetings. It is also about protecting your time. Because then it says, after saying all this about meetings, is the company's leaders will also encourage workers to decline other meetings and remove themselves from large internal chat groups. So this is not just about meetings at all.
Yeah, it is recognizing that constant, what Cal Newport calls the hive mind, of just these endless conversations that you're threaded into. Do these people get a special pass on neighborhood WhatsApp groups as well? Or Facebook groups? Are you allowed to say, no, I'm sorry, it's my new policy, I'm just not getting into this?
Yeah. And I think it just also, there's a note about how many companies are introducing no meeting days. And like you say, why not? But I think that, again, it's just seeing what things and what headlines are pushbacks and what they represent and what else is going on, because I found that very revealing. It's not just meetings, it's actually just this constant having to be conversing, whether in meetings or asynchronously, in these places which are just full of people. It's like being in a big room all day if you're in a big company channel, and then deciding where am I providing the most value and where am I getting the most value. And that is really difficult. It goes back a little bit to the conversation around, if I'm ill, I need to stop working, even if I have access to work from home. Again, there's all these possibilities and all this ability to be everywhere is in front of us. And it's really difficult to be very disciplined around that.
Yes, and maybe it's at the end of the day, with so much possibility to be always on, it has to come back to somehow building the capacity of the individual to recognize the boundaries and maintain them, and say, actually, I am off sick today, or I need to be head down in this thing today, so you're not going to see me in the Slack. Or these are whole new self-management skills that hopefully remote workers do have some advantage over, but everybody's going to need them. It's like, there's no company that's not a tech firm. There's no knowledge worker that doesn't have to have a mastery of these boundaries and how much they let these apps into their day-to-day working lives.
That's a new skill, newish, that everybody needs to learn. Well, and talking of communication and stuff with listeners, we would love to hear from you. I have to say hello to Bart, who has been a listener from a very long time ago, and he phoned me the other day. So, listeners, you're very welcome.
On the telephone?
Yes, yes. And in fact, a friend of mine, but she also listens to Management Cafe, which, by the way, listeners, you're very welcome to listen to as well. And there was a problem with the file, and she actually phoned me as well to say, Pilar, I can't listen to your show. So this is happening. Maybe that's a prediction to 2023. More real-time conversations.
Wow, that's strange. We have to find that app with the sort of the thing with the handle.
Yes. So listeners, I would love to hear from you anyway. All the details are on the contact page on virtualnotdistant.com. We do have a newsletter once a month. I send out a recommendation of reading, listening, and just a little bit of what's going on. And now I will be sending out a poem a month because it's a lot of fun from the GPT-3. And Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com. It's the email. We will I did ask the chatbot to write an ode to email or something like that as well. And so, Maya, anything you want to say to listeners before we wrap up?
No, I think it's going to be another fascinating year in remote work and the future of work. So I'm glad we've kicked it off strongly, and we look forward to having you along with us for the rest of it.
Yes, and do tell us, do send us articles or current topics or anything you would like us to discuss, because we would love to have that input. So thank you for listening. A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.